On this planet, you will die. We have seen it.
I have a pretty extensive relationship with Dune. The first piece of Dune media I came into contact with was the 1984 film when I was around 5 years of age. Don't ask. Followed by Dune 2000 a few years later. I then went on to get my hands on Emperor Battle for Dune before finally getting around to reading the books in 2014. You could say that Dune has had a constant presence throughout most of my life. So it probably doesn't come as much surprise to hear me say that I was excited when I first heard that the books would be receiving a high-budget treatment with spectacular cinematography. Then, as if a sign from the great Shai-Hulud itself, Dune 2021 came out just 2 days before my 27th birthday, and I was ready for a hit of some of that spice melange. As a whole, I think the movie is pretty decent. It's got good acting, I like the cast, and the visuals are downright gorgeous, and I found it to be well paced for the most part. That said, there are some things I feel could have been stronger from an artistic standpoint, yet perhaps a little more importantly, there were a number of things that were just flat out terrible when looked at from a wider social lens, and we need to talk about those points as well. Therefore, I'll be dividing this review into 3 parts, with part 1 discussing 3 things I enjoyed about the movie, part 2 discussing 3 things I disliked, and part 3 covering 3 things that just never should have been in any movie. Of course, I have no idea how any of this will turn out. I mean, I've never really done anything like this before, so who knows? Maybe you'll get to watch me crash and burn like an ornithopter in a sandstorm. Just some Arrakis humour there. Though before we can get round to that, I just need to give a content warning for the following topics: colonialism, child sexual assault, sexual slavery, and homophobia. Also, spoiler warning, not just for the movie, but for the books as well. So you have been warned. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media like Twitter, Reddit, and Discord. And with that out of the way, let's move on to a few things I enjoyed about the movie, starting with the way in which some of these small world-building features have been taken straight from the book. Because we need to be real here. There was no way to include every little detail from the original book, as it is a fat-off tome served with its own side dish of appendix. Add to this the fact that society has become a lot more aware of certain issues than it was previously, and there was always going to be a need for stuff to be cut down, compressed, and updated for a modern film audience. However, by including little details where possible, the writers and design team can still show the audience that they too have a passion for their story. That it's not just a meaningless cash cow to be milked drier than the sands of Arrakis itself. And there's one scene in particular that really did this for me, and that was the tree scene in front of the palace. During the Atreides' journey from the spaceport to their new palace home, they had to do a flyover of Arrakis, the main city of the desert planet of Arrakis, Dune. During which my wife, Adita, remarked at the fact that there wasn't a tree in sight. That got me talking to her about just how scarce water is on the planet. Water is so tight, in fact, that the Arrakis began rioting when they heard just how many soldiers the Atreides would be bringing to their city due to fears of shortages. That was until Leto explained that he'd be building additional wind traps to cover his men's water consumption, wind traps being an in-universe building designed to draw water from the desert wind. We got talking about just how much water a tree consumes before I went on to explain how, in the book, there were rows of palm trees in front of the palace that had gone on to take on a variety of meanings. To some, it was a display of extravagance and even cruelty due to how much water they took, enough for 100 men in total. To others, they were a symbol of an abandoned dream, what they'd hoped to bring to the planet. Then there were those who viewed them with religious reverence, something to look up to and remind people that they're part of a bigger system. Sadly, much like my wife, I didn't see any trees as the Atreides approached the palace, so I thought it was just another detail that had been cut out. Which is kinda sad, you know? It was such a simple detail that really sets the tone for the planet, its culture, and its many factions that I felt kind of a shame. But it wasn't meant to be, or so I thought. Skip forward a couple of scenes, and Paul was walking along rows of palm trees when he comes across a waterer who explains to him that each tree took the water of 5 people. There were 20 trees, therefore they took the same water as 100 people in total. And it was just, yeah, loved it. I also loved the design of the waterer. He wasn't just using a garden hose, he was using a polished dish at the end of a pole to ensure as much of the water made it to the palms as possible. That specialization, that tiny detail, gave his actions more the appearance of ritual as opposed to gardening, which again speaks to the many meanings behind the trees. So every little thing about that one scene was just brilliant. It really showed that someone somewhere on the team had really clicked with the material. Now, to be fair, since I went back and checked the flyover again now that I knew the trees were there, they are visible. I just missed them as they're pretty hard to see being so small. Either way, I was really happy that this and other small details were included. It might seem insignificant, but it really helped me feel like this truly was the world of Dune. That said, I also appreciated some of the changes that were made, which leads me on to the second thing I really enjoyed, and that was the changes made to Dr. Liet Keynes. Just to be clear here, I'm not referring to the changes made to the Doctor's gender. I do think it was a good move to help balance the cast of the original book a little more, and Dr. Keynes was a great candidate for that since their gender had no impact on their character in the book. What I'm referring to is the way in which this Dr. Keynes is so much more defiant than her book counterpart. For a start, I fucking love the casting choice of Sharon Duncan-Brewster for this role. She has such power on screen that allows her to stand firm whilst Dr. Keynes is being put under duress by Leto Atreides, and for that to come off naturally.
Dr. Keynes, you saw it. With your own eyes, it's plain to see. Everything they've left us is in shambles. We've been set up to fail.
That carryall was just old. The desert isn't kind to equipment.
You know what will happen if I don't get spice production back on track?
I'm not here to take your part. Arrakis has seen men like you come and go. Take good care of your family. The desert's not kind to humans either.
This defiance is carried on throughout the rest of her role, right up to the very end. In the original book, Dr. Keynes was dumped into the desert and left to die, doing so after he triggers a spice blow. And part of me understands this. After all, he was an ecologist, so being killed by the planet's ecosystem is sort of a homage to that. Not to mention, gave Frank Herbert a chance to explain a little more about Arrakis' ecology and the nature of spice. However, in the movie, Dr. Keynes was given a much more active role in her death. She was attempting to cool a worm when she was ambushed and wounded by a group of Sadukar, who subsequently charged her with treason, leading her to defy them and their emperor one last time.
I serve only one master. His name is Shai Hulud.
Using a worm as her final weapon to take her would-be executors with her is inspired. It not only keeps the ecological significance of her book counterpart, but it shows a greater connection to the desert and the Fremen people, both in her usage of desert power to fight off invaders, and the worm's religious significance in choosing to welcome death that way. In all, I think that is the perfect end for her character, and it shows how changing the material can result in something greater. Which leads me on to my third positive, the way in which the Harkonnens' cruelty is not reliant on demonization of gay men. There is no way to put things nicely, and honestly, I'm under no obligation to do so in order to preserve the feelings of more fragile fans. Frank Herbert was monstrously homophobic, something I should probably cover in greater detail in a later video, since it really isn't the place to do so right now. We're talking about the 2021 movie, specifically how it avoided his bullshit in this instance. Suffice to say, one of the core ways Frank Herbert attempts to convey the idea that Baron Harkonnen is evil is by falling back on the gay predator trope. Baron Harkonnen is not simply gay, he's specifically a gay child rapist who even buys a sex slave because said slave has a physical resemblance to Paul. This not only relies on homophobic narratives that gained popularity during the post-World War II era and are still used against LGBT+ folk to this day, but it also exploits child rape for shock value. As a CSA survivor, even if it weren't wrapped up in homophobic tropes, the way Herbert writes the stuff would still make me uncomfortable. This is not a nuanced look at the horrors of child rape that pays the matter due respect. It is tacky window dressing reliant on homophobic shorthand. Thankfully, it is completely absent from this movie, which is more reliant on showing the Harkonnens' brutality through the Baron's actions. An example of this can be seen in the Baron's pet. What might at first glance seem to be some generic variant of space spider can, on closer inspection, be seen to have human hands for feet and a rather human face. Take that along with what Dr. Yue says about the Harkonnens' torture of his wife later on.
The Harkonnens have my wife, Mana. They take her apart like a doll. I will buy her freedom, and you are the price.
And we begin to build a pretty clear picture of the Baron and his twisted nature. That said, the movie still falls back on different forms of othering when presenting the Harkonnens as evil, something we'll discuss more in the third video. I also feel that the writers and director pass over easy opportunities to show more examples of the Harkonnens' evil through their actions, which we'll cover in the second video. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. Of course, these aren't the only things I enjoyed about the movie. As already mentioned, the cinematography is gorgeous. I also love the use of sign language and how the movie handled prophecy scenes. You've also got to give the visual teams credit for coming up with an ornithopter design that is both beautiful and yet appears somewhat grounded, unlike previous renditions that ran on Roadrunner physics. However, not everything is great, as we'll go on to discuss in the second video, talking about 3 things I disliked from an artistic standpoint. So be sure to subscribe and stick around for that. But yeah, what did you enjoy about the film? What 3 things would make your list? Do you disagree with any of my choices? Did I miss anything you lot noticed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Just understand that abuse won't make it through. And if you like what we do, then please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to give thanks to the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gerrit Van Voorst, Cthulhu, and Flynn. And with that said, take care now.